My name is Claire Donovan. I am 29 years old, and I own a boutique marketing agency in Austin, Texas. 3 years ago, my business partner walked out on me when we had nothing but debt and a dream. Last Monday, he showed up at my office with a lawyer and a contract demanding 60% of everything I had built. I smiled at him across the conference table, and what I said next made his lawyer quietly pack up his briefcase and leave without a word. But before I tell you what I said, please like and subscribe to Heartway Stories and tell me in the comments which state you're watching from. It was a regular Monday morning. My team was already at their desks when my assistant, Priya, knocked on my glass office door. She had that particular look on her face, the one she gets when something is off, but she doesn't quite know how to say it. "Claire," she said carefully. "There are 2 men in the lobby. They don't have an appointment." I looked up from my laptop. "Clients?" She shook her head slowly. "One of them says he's your former business partner. The other one is carrying a briefcase and introduced himself as an attorney." I set my coffee down. For a moment, the whole office seemed to go quiet around me, even though I could still hear keyboards clicking and phones ringing beyond my door. I hadn't heard that name in 3 years. 3 years of silence. 3 years of building something out of the wreckage he left behind. And now he was standing in my lobby with a lawyer. "Which conference room is open?" I asked. "Room B," Priya said. "Put them in there," I said. "I'll be there in 5 minutes." She nodded and left. I stood up slowly, straightened my blazer, and looked out through the glass wall of my office at the open floor below. 12 employees. A creative team, a strategy team, 2 account managers, and a junior analyst we had just hired last month. All of them working on campaigns for clients who trusted us. All of them here because of what I had built after the worst year of my life. I walked down the hall toward Conference Room B. My former business partner, Marcus Webb, was sitting at the far end of the table when I pushed the door open. He looked exactly the same, confident, leaning back slightly in his chair, arms relaxed, like he had every right to be there. The attorney beside him was older, gray at the temples, with a leather briefcase open in front of him and a stack of papers already laid out on the table. Marcus smiled when he saw me. "Claire, you look great. The place looks great." I didn't sit down. I stood near the door. "Marcus, it's been a while," he said. 3 years, I said. "Since you cleaned out our joint business account and left a voicemail saying you were done." The attorney cleared his throat quietly. Marcus didn't flinch. "That's actually why we're here," Marcus said. "To clear all of that up." I looked at the papers on the table. "What is that?" The attorney slid a copy across the table toward me. "A partnership reclamation agreement," he said evenly. "Mr. Webb is prepared to rejoin Donovan Creative as a co-owner with a 60% equity stake in exchange for dropping any prior financial claims against him." I stared at the document, then I looked at Marcus. "You want 60% of my company," I said slowly. "Our company," he said, leaning forward. "Claire, think about this clearly. I was there at the beginning. My name was on the original LLC filing. I have documentation of my early contributions, the initial client list, the brand strategy framework we built together, the first pitch deck. Any court would recognize that as foundational equity." I looked at him for a long moment without speaking. Then I pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down. "Tell me something, Marcus," I said. "When exactly did you decide that what you walked out on was worth coming back for?" He had the decency to pause before answering. "I made a mistake," he said. "I panicked. The agency was struggling, I had personal things going on, and I made a bad call. But the foundation we built together is part of why this company is what it is today." The attorney nodded as if that made perfect legal sense. "The foundation?" I repeated. "Yes," Marcus said. I picked up the document and turned a few pages without reading them, then set it back down. "All right," I said quietly. "I'm not going to make a decision like this in a private room. If this is a real business proposal, it deserves a proper audience." Marcus glanced at his attorney, then back at me. "What kind of audience?" "My full leadership team," I said. "Senior staff, our head of accounts, our legal advisor. Everyone who has a stake in this company's direction. We'll hold a formal meeting, you present the agreement, and we'll go from there." The attorney seemed pleased by this. Marcus smiled that same confident smile I had seen 100 times before. The one that meant he thought he had already won. "That's very professional," the attorney said. "Tonight," I said. 7 o'clock, I'll have everyone here." Marcus stood and extended his hand. "Tonight, then." I shook it briefly and walked them back to the lobby. Before the elevator doors closed, Marcus looked back at me with that easy grin. "I always knew you'd be reasonable, Claire. That's why this is going to work." The doors closed. I stood there in the lobby for a moment. Priya appeared at my shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. "Call Jordan," I said. Jordan was our legal advisor. "And tell everyone we have a 7 o'clock. She looked at me carefully. Should I be worried? I started walking back toward my office. Not even a little. I need to tell you about the night everything fell apart, because without it, none of what happened next makes sense. 3 years ago, Marcus and I had been running Donovan Creative together for almost 18 months. The agency had started as my idea. I had spent 2 years freelancing in digital marketing after college, building a client list on my own, saving every dollar I could. When Marcus came along through a mutual friend, he seemed like exactly what I needed. He was charming, connected, and good at walking into a room and making people feel like they were already partners. I handled the work. The actual work. The strategy decks, the creative direction, the client calls, the late nights rewriting copy until 2 in the morning. Marcus handled the relationship side. He took clients to dinner, played golf with their CEOs, and introduced us to people I never would have reached on my own. For a while, it was a good balance. But slowly, I started noticing something. Whenever clients praised a campaign, Marcus would smile and say we had a great vision for this one, with a particular emphasis on we that seemed to mean me. When a major retail brand signed with us after a pitch that I had built from scratch over 3 weeks, Marcus took the congratulatory call and never once mentioned my name. I told myself it was just his style. That's how people like him operate, I thought. It doesn't mean anything. Then I walked in early one morning and heard him on the phone with a venture capital contact. "The agency is really my vision," he was saying. "I brought in the talent to execute it, but the strategic foundation, the brand identity that came from me." I stopped in the hallway outside his office. I stood there for a full minute listening to him describe a company I had built as though he had designed every inch of it, and I was a contractor he had hired to do the technical parts. After he hung up, I walked in and closed the door behind me. "I heard you," I said. He looked up. "Claire, don't," I said. "I heard exactly what you said. That this agency is your vision. That you brought in talent to execute it." He leaned back in his chair. "You're being sensitive. That's just how you talk to investors. You have to speak their language." "Their language," I repeated. "So lying is their language." He sighed like I was exhausting him. "You write great copy and you run a clean project timeline. But I'm the one building the relationships that keep this agency funded. That's worth something, Claire. I started this company before I ever met you," I said. "And it was going nowhere before I came in," he said flatly. That night, I went home and sat in my apartment for a long time thinking about what to do. I wasn't naive. I knew that the relationships he brought mattered. I knew that his network had opened doors that would have taken me years to reach alone. But there is a difference between being a valued partner and being erased from the story of your own company, and what I had heard that morning was erasure. I decided I would have a real conversation with him the next morning. I was going to suggest we redefine our roles, put something in writing about attribution and decision-making, and move forward clearly. But when I got to the office the next morning, Marcus wasn't there. Priya handed me an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note that said only, "I'm out. It's not working. Don't try to call." And the joint business account we used for operating expenses, the one both our names were on, had been emptied. $41,000. Gone. He had transferred it to himself in the middle of the night. I sat in my office for 3 hours that morning and did not cry. I was too stunned to cry. We had 2 client payments due the following week, a contractor I owed money to, and now no operating cash. I called the bank. I called a lawyer. I learned very quickly what my options were and weren't. I paid what I owed from my personal savings. I called every client we had and told them calmly that the agency was restructuring, but their campaigns were on track. I worked for 4 months without paying myself. I slept on my friend's couch for 6 weeks to save on rent. And I rebuilt. Client by client, campaign by campaign, I built Donovan Creative into something real. Real enough that by our 2nd year operating without Marcus, we had tripled our original revenue. Real enough that we now had 12 employees and a client list that included 2 national brands and a regional healthcare network. Real enough that a man who had walked away now wanted 60% of it. What Marcus did not know, what he could not have known, was that I had been waiting for this moment for longer than he realized. Not out of bitterness. I want to be clear about that. I had stopped being bitter about Marcus sometime during my 2nd year when I realized that what he did had forced me to find out exactly how capable I actually was. But I am a careful person. I am a planner. And a long time ago, a mentor told me something I never forgot. Document everything, because memory is not evidence. So I had. At 7 o'clock that evening, conference room A was full. My leadership team was seated along one side of the table: Jordan, our legal advisor, next to our head of accounts, Renata, and our creative director, Ben, who had been with me since month 3. Several senior employees sat behind them along the wall. And Marcus sat at the far end with his attorney, looking relaxed, a fresh copy of his agreement laid out neatly in front of him. I stood at the head of the table. "Thank you everyone for being here on short notice," I said. "Tonight we're evaluating a proposed partnership agreement. Mr. Webb and his counsel have requested a 60% equity stake in Donovan Creative, and I wanted this decision made transparently in front of the people who have built this company." Marcus nodded approvingly. His attorney uncapped a pen. "Mr. Webb," I said, "please go ahead and present your case." Marcus stood smoothly. He was good at this part: the room, the presentation, the confidence. He laid out his argument methodically. Early contributions. Original LLC documents. The foundational client relationships. The brand strategy framework. He made it sound reasonable. He made it sound almost inevitable. When he finished, he sat back down and smiled at me. "I think the record speaks for itself," he said. "It does," I said. I looked toward the door. "Diane, could you come in, please?" The door opened and a woman walked in. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, carrying a thin folder. She sat down at the table without introducing herself, because I had already told the room who she was. A forensic accountant I had retained 3 weeks earlier, the moment I had first heard through a mutual contact that Marcus was making inquiries about Donovan Creative's current valuation. I had known he was coming before he arrived. The attorney's pen stopped moving. 3 years ago, I said calmly, Mr. Webb withdrew $41,000 from our joint business operating account without my knowledge or consent, then terminated our partnership via a handwritten note. I looked at Marcus. At the time, I chose not to pursue civil litigation because I simply needed to focus on keeping the company alive. But I documented everything. Marcus's expression hadn't changed, but something behind his eyes had shifted. "Diane," I said. She opened her folder. "The original LLC filing names both parties as co-founders," she said clearly. However, the operating agreement signed 4 months into the partnership, which Mr. Webb signed, includes a voluntary withdrawal clause. In the event that a partner voluntarily exits the business and removes themselves from active participation, their equity interest is subject to buyout at the valuation at time of exit, not at any future valuation. The attorney leaned over and said something quietly to Marcus. Diane continued without pausing. At the time of Mr. Webb's voluntary withdrawal, the company's valuation was approximately $67,000 based on accounts receivable and existing contracts. His equity share at that point, per the operating agreement, would have been valued at $33,500. Against the $41,000 he withdrew from the business account upon exit, Mr. Webb is not owed equity. He is, in fact, in debt to this company to the tune of $7,500, not accounting for 3 years of potential interest. The room was very quiet. I looked at Marcus. His jaw was tight. The easy confidence from that morning, the relaxed lean in his chair, all of it was gone. He looked like a man who had walked into a building expecting a hallway and found himself in a room with no exits. "You had this prepared," he said. His voice was flat. "I've been prepared for a while," I said. His attorney put a hand on his arm. Marcus shook it off. "You can't seriously be threatening me with a $7,500 claim." "I'm not threatening you with anything," I said. "I'm showing you, in front of witnesses, that the agreement you brought in here tonight has no legal foundation. The operating agreement you signed supersedes the original LLC filing. You exited voluntarily. You withdrew funds. Your equity interest was extinguished at the time of your withdrawal." The attorney closed his briefcase quietly. Marcus stood up. "This isn't over." "Actually," Jordan said, speaking for the first time, "it is. I've reviewed all of the same documentation. If you proceed with this claim, we will countersue for the unlawful withdrawal, and I'm confident we will win. I'd encourage you to speak with your counsel privately before taking any further steps." Marcus looked at me for a long moment. I held his gaze and didn't say anything because there was nothing left to say. He picked up his copy of the agreement from the table, folded it once, and put it in his jacket pocket. Then he walked to the door without looking at anyone. His attorney followed, murmuring an apology to no one in particular as he went. The door closed. For a second, nobody spoke. Then Ben, my creative director, exhaled slowly. "Okay," he said. I did not know what this meeting was going to be, but that was not what I expected. A few people laughed a little nervously, but genuinely. Renata looked at me from across the table. "How long have you been sitting on all of that?" 3 weeks of formal preparation, I said. 3 years of keeping good records. After everyone filtered out, Priya found me in my office, standing at the window, looking out at the Austin skyline. It was past 9. The office was quiet now. "You okay?" she asked. I thought about it honestly before answering. "Yeah," I said. "I actually am." She leaned in the doorway. "Did you always know he'd come back eventually?" I turned away from the window. I didn't know when. But I knew that when someone walks away from something because they don't believe in it, and then it becomes valuable, they have a way of remembering all the reasons it was really theirs all along. So I just made sure I was ready. She nodded slowly. "That's either really wise or really sad." "Maybe both," I said. She smiled and said goodnight. I heard her footsteps down the hall and then the elevator, and then the building was silent. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. There was a campaign brief waiting for me, a client check-in to prep for in the morning, a budget review I had pushed off twice this week. The normal, steady, real work of a company that actually existed because I had refused to let it disappear. I thought about who I had been 3 years ago, sitting in an empty office with an emptied bank account and a handwritten note that said I'm out. I thought about the 6 weeks on my friend's couch, the 4 months without a paycheck, the client calls I made while trying to keep my voice calm when everything inside me was terrified. And I thought about what it had taught me, not about Marcus, but about myself. That I was more capable than I had ever needed to be when someone was standing next to me. That I could outwork any version of a bad situation if I stayed focused and kept showing up. That the most powerful thing you can do when someone tries to take credit for your life is to go build something they could never take credit for again. Marcus had walked into my building that morning, expecting to find someone who still had something to lose. What he found instead was someone who had already won. I closed the campaign brief, saved my notes, and turned off my desk lamp. On my way out, I paused for a second in the empty conference room and looked at the long table, the empty chairs, the Austin lights glowing through the windows. 3 years ago, someone told me this wasn't really mine. Tonight, 12 people sat in this room and watched me prove otherwise. I turned off the light and went home. If you've ever had someone walk out on you and then try to walk back in when you were finally standing on solid ground, I want you to know something. The ground you're standing on is yours, every inch of it. Don't sign anything that says otherwise. Thank you for watching Heartway Stories. If this one meant something to you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And I'll see you in the next one.